All right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I think we have the majority of the group here. So we will dive into our conversation for today. Let me go ahead and get going. Okay. So thank you all for being here today. We are going to be giving an update on what is happening with the CoC competition this year. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be giving an update on the timeline of what has happened thus far with the CoC competition and court orders. So for some of you, this might be familiar information. If you've been keeping up in kind of some other spaces, you might be familiar with what's happening, but we just want to make sure that everyone is aware and that we all have the same understanding. I'm going to give an update on how this is impacting our project applications, whether it's renewal projects, new projects, or transition projects. We're going to just talk briefly about eSnaps and project ranking. I am going to talk a little bit about the December NOFO. We'll get into this a little bit more, but because this may be relevant to our future, I will talk a bit about what was in the NOFO that HUD released in December. And then we're going to talk about some immediate next steps as well. So as we go along, we are recording this webinar. So the recording and the slides will be posted to our website within the next couple of days. As I go along, feel free to drop questions in the chat, raise your hand, come off of mute. We can certainly, entertain questions as we go. I will also preface this by saying that it's likely you will have questions that I will not have answers to. There's a lot of complexities and a lot of things that we are going through this year with the competition that we have never encountered before. So we are all sort of in new territory here, but I will do my best to answer questions as they arise. Okay, so we're going to start off with doing a bit of a deep dive into some timeline stuff. So this might feel a little detailed, but I really just want to kind of lay a groundwork of how we got to where we are today, particularly for folks on this call who are maybe newer to the continuum of care funding cycle, or maybe this is not a typical year anyway, but maybe have less history. But so let me kind of go through what has happened to bring us to where we are today. So we're going to start by going back to the spring and summer of 2024. So in 2024, HUD released what we call a 2-year NOFO, 24-25 2-year NOFO. And this NOFO is going to be really important because it's going to come up later in our discussion today. But in 2024, this was the first time that HUD intentionally wanted to lay out a 2-year funding cycle where we would do the normal competition in 2024, and then in 2025, we would not have to do a typical competition, but rather HUD would have some type of process to renew projects that were already in operation. We were all very excited about this 2-year NOFO. The competition is a lot of work for everyone, and so we were excited about the opportunity to essentially take a year off. So that was what happened over the course of the summer and the fall of 2024. Then as 2025 rolled around, a new administration took office, as we are all aware, and we began to kind of get some some rumblings or some perhaps hints that the new administration may want to re-release the NOFO to align CoC funding with the new administration's priorities. So in light of that, particularly for folks on this call who currently receive CoC funding, you'll know that over the course of the summer and into the early fall of 2025, we did a project review, essentially an evaluation of your existing projects. We looked at your performance data, you got a score, a scorecard. We did that all over the course of the summer and the fall of 2025, really in anticipation of not really knowing what may happen with any kind of 2025 competition, but just wanting to be prepared. And also just as level, important to know, like, how did projects perform over the prior year. We did get a very brief and cryptic email from HUD in July of 2025 that they did intend to release a 2025 NOFO and to hold a competition in 2025. So that communication in July was sort of like the first real hint that we got that something was going to happen. And then obviously there was a government shutdown in October that kind of delayed things, but in November, on November 13th, HUD released their 2025 NOFO. This was released on November 13th. In that November NOFO, there was a lot of really significant changes from what we saw in prior years. HUD was implementing a cap on how much permanent housing could be funded. They were implementing a 30% cap, which was significantly less than what we currently utilize here in Detroit for permanent housing. They were capping the amount of funding that could be placed in what's called Tier 1, which is essentially money that CoCs are more like kind of guaranteed to receive. That was capped at 30% versus the 90% it had been in the past. They also implemented a lot new, many new priorities in terms of funding priorities, in terms of what they wanted to see the CoC funding accomplished. There was a significant shift towards transitional housing programs, treatment-focused programs, requiring service participation, aligning with executive orders, and a movement away from permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. So the November NOFO just brought with it really a ton of changes within the CoC competition. So in response to that November 13th NOFO, locally here in Detroit, we took a number of steps. So first, well, not really first, a lot of this happened consecutively, it felt like. But we released a local application for new project funding in alignment with the new project types that were identified in that NOFO. We have released an application for agencies to apply for transitional housing, street outreach, standalone supportive services only, which are 3 project types that we have historically not funded with CoC funding. On the transitional housing side, new projects at least. And we also did release a local application for coordinated entry and dedicated HMIS as well. Again, that was in alignment with that November NOFO. We also, in November, had a series of individual meetings with all of our existing permanent housing funded agencies to talk about what this NOFO may mean for them with the cap on permanent housing. So in response to that NOFO, we had the sense that some pretty significant and quick decisions were going to need to be made around which permanent housing projects were going to be submitted to HUD. Because with that November NOFO, we were looking at a timeline of having to have funding decisions made by the end of December. So in November, we also released what we call the transition application for existing current permanent housing projects to communicate to the CoC around what type of other project type they may be willing or interested in transitioning to. And those other project types were transitional housing, supportive services only, or street outreach, to align with the new project types that were in that November NOFO. So we initially had a local deadline of December 12th for all of that information for new project applications and transition applications to be submitted to us. So in late November, early December, 2 lawsuits were filed against HUD. One was filed by a coalition of states' attorneys generals. Michigan's attorney general was a part of that. Another lawsuit was filed by the National Alliance to End Homelessness and some of their partners. Those lawsuits were essentially claiming the same thing. And so the federal judge who is hearing these cases is essentially kind of combining those lawsuits in one case, hearing them together. But this is really key that these lawsuits were filed, again, late November, early December, against HUD because of what they had in the NOFO. So on December 8th, HUD withdrew or rescinded that November NOFO that they had initially released. And when they withdrew it, they stated that they intended to re-release it with changes. So the number of reasons why HUD did this, one was primarily because of the lawsuits that were filed against them. So in light of HUD's withdrawal of that NOFO, but still keeping in mind that something was likely still to come in the coming months, we changed our local deadline for new project applications and transition applications. We pushed that back to January 16th. And that deadline still stands. I know I've communicated with a number of folks about what's happening with this January 16th deadline. That deadline is still in effect. And in a little bit, I'll explain why we're still keeping with the January 16th deadline. On December 12th, HAND facilitated a meeting with our existing CoC providers and our board members to begin a conversation around what factors should be considered when making permanent housing funding decisions. So we initially planned this meeting when the November NOFO was released in light of needing to make really quick funding decisions. We still kept the meeting on the calendar and still held it even after that NOFO was rescinded. Again, just because we knew it made sense to kind of keep these planning meetings and planning discussions going forward. So the conversation that was had on December 12th really was just intended to be a start of future conversations around funding for permanent housing. On December 19th, there was the initial hearing was held between HUD and in response to the lawsuits. I know many of us on this call may have had a chance to watch that hearing. I will talk in a minute about the order that the judge gave in response to that hearing. Also on December 19th, late in the day, HUD did reissue their 2025 NOFO. They reissued it with the caveat they are not currently enforcing it. It is not currently enforceable, but they did follow through on what they said they were going to do in terms of re-releasing the 2025 NOFO. We're going to talk later about what's in that NOFO because it may become relevant to us at some point in the future. So the judge issued her written ruling on December 23rd. We're going to talk in a minute about what she ruled. HUD did start, there were certain steps that HUD had to take in response to her ruling. They have complied with those steps, one of which was to reopen that 2-year NOFO from the 24-25 2-year NOFO. So HUD has complied with those steps. The 2-year NOFO is now open again. There are certain steps that CoCs are expected to take in response to that 2-year NOFO. There's a deadline of certain things that might need to be submitted to HUD by February 9th. And we're going to get into that a little bit more in terms of what the reopening of the 2-year NOFO means and what it doesn't mean. Okay, so that was the timeline. I realized that might have felt really detailed, but I really there was so much that happened in December. It felt like every day something was changing. And I know some of us may have felt like we kind of had whiplash in terms of what's happening. So wanted to kind of walk through the sequence of events that occurred over the past couple of months. So let's talk a bit about the judge's ruling from the hearing that was held on the 19th. She issued her ruling on the 23rd, her written ruling. So here's what her written ruling said, and I will caveat this with saying I am not an attorney. I did steal this language from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. I've also been listening to and hearing to other people who have more of a legal background to help us interpret some of this. So that's where a lot of this is coming from. If anyone has a different interpretation of what I'm saying, please welcome that, particularly if you have a law background. Okay, here's what the judge's ruling is though. So she essentially told HUD they could not rescind that 2-year NOFO. So what was released in that 2-year NOFO that came out in like the summer of 2024, the judge said, nope, you cannot take that off the table. The judge also said you cannot move forward with your own 2025 NOFO. So you can't do either of those things. The judge ordered HUD to start taking steps to essentially implement that 2-year NOFO, to start processing eligible renewal applications. But what HUD does not yet have to do at this point is essentially start issuing grant agreements. So, and then HUD was required to do some, inform applicants of how this was all going to happen and what the steps were going to be that we would need to take place. And they have done that through their subsequent communication. So one thing that's really important to note is that this ruling from the judge is temporary. This is not a final ruling. And we anticipate that litigation will continue because this is not yet a final ruling. So here's what the judge's ruling means. Again, this is not a final ruling. No one has yet won or lost this case. We anticipate that there will be additional hearings in response to these lawsuits. So again, as I said, right now where we're at, HUD cannot take that 2-year NOFO off the table, but they also cannot enforce their own 2025 NOFO that they would like to move forward with. The court's instructions to HUD to start processing applications under the 2-year NOFO are essentially telling HUD to start taking initial administrative steps in the event that HUD does ultimately lose the court case. So if HUD does ultimately lose their case, the initial steps will have already been taken from which they can then and would be then expected to start issuing grant agreements. So where we're at right now, again, as HUD has been instructed, you need to kind of start doing some things in case you ultimately do lose the case, but also recognizing that, again, the case, that there has been no final ruling yet. HUD has also indicated, though, that if they end up winning the case, they intend to implement the December NOFO, the NOFO that was released in December. So HUD is complying with the court's orders at this point, but they have also said that if we do end up winning our case, the 2-year NOFO is off the table and we are going to enforce our December of 2025 NOFO. So because this is not a final ruling, we don't have a clear timeline at this point on when there may be a final ruling. It could be 3 to 6 months. It could be earlier than that. There is some hope or some optimism that the judge will expedite the case. As of right now, to my knowledge, there is not another court date scheduled. That doesn't mean that it's not, on the radar and will be scheduled soon. But just to note that there could still be several months before there is any kind of resolution to the court case. Okay. I'm going to pause to see if we're going to start getting into some details on what this means for you all as a funded agency or as an agency that has been working on a new project application. Before we start talking about some of the details of what this means for you, I'll just pause to see if there's any questions.
Hi, Amanda. This is Linda with Detroit Rescue Mission. I do have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you for laying all this out. And I'd like to ask for an interpretation of some of the terms.
Sure.
I'm hearing, when I hear December NOFO, I hear Trump's NOFO. And when I hear 24-25 NOFO, I hear the previous administration's NOFO. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah. Hi, Linda. This is Umi Hankins,
Yes.
Black Sage Collective. And I just wanted to make sure that when you say this 1-year NOFO, you're referring to the 1-year NOFO or 2-year NOFO, that the current application that we're submitting is a 3 to 5-year NOFO that we would be applying for. Is that correct?
Yeah, so let me clarify. So there's a difference between when we talk about the years or the time frame. So the individual project applications that new projects are able to work on right now, you are able to request a multi-year budget. You can request a 3-year, 5-year budget. that is different than when we're talking about 2-year or 1-year NOFOs. The CoC competition is historically held annually. So typically every year there is a NOFO that's released. So that's what we mean by 1-year NOFO, meaning this NOFO is released this year, it's going to be released next year, it's going to be released the following year, even though projects that are funded under the NOFO may receive initial funding for multiple years, which means they would not come up for renewal until kind of their grant term ends. So when we mentioned the 2-year NOFO, that was the first time that HUD had agreed, hey, we're going to release this NOFO in 2024, but we're not going to re-release it in 2025. Rather, in 2025, we're going to automatically renew everyone so communities won't have to go through this laborious local application process every year. So that is what was meant by the 2-year NOFO, which again is different than the individual grant terms that we're allowing new project applications to apply for this year.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Jane?
Please just describe what it means when the language that says HUD has to start processing the 2-year renewals, but does not have to issue grant agreements or obligate funds.
Yes.
How will that help us?
So you're getting ahead of me. It doesn't. Just to be
Okay, all right.
yes.
But that's okay. I'm not a judge, but that doesn't make any sense. I know someone's going to say, "Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense." Well, explain it to me. Not you. I'm just saying in general. I mean that. Okay.
Here's
What's the relief? All right.
Sure. So my understanding of it is because I think it goes back to the fact that the case is not yet final. So this is my thoughts, is that because a final ruling has not been made, and I don't know why a final ruling has not been made. That's beyond my pay grade a lot. But because a final ruling has not yet been made, I think the thinking is if HUD loses, and given the fact that they're already so far behind, if let's say 3 months from now a final ruling is made and HUD loses, we want HUD to be able to take action immediately to start issuing grant agreements. But in order for them to be able to take those immediate actions, things have to be done now. So I think though, if there's let's have a note of optimism. There seems to be things are going. Even these initial rulings from the judge are in our favor. There seems to be a recognition from the court that what HUD is trying to do in this moment is destructive, is not good, essentially. So I think that's where if there's a smidgen of optimism and hope there that ultimately the court case will go our way, I guess. Yes, Jane.
So worst case scenario, this keeps getting delayed and there's more injunctions, and it's great that we're all teed up to have HUD's all teed up to process the renewals, and they rule in October.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's bad.
Yeah, yes. So let me maybe.
So I get it. I get it that it primes them, but it primes them and it helps if we know. So we won't really know anything until the case is settled.
Yes. Yeah.
So we won't have any hope of funding by August 1st, 2026, as we had.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
So maybe so I think what we're getting into is talking about the impact on our project application. So maybe let's move there. Jane, I do still see your hand up. Is there something, another immediate?
No, I have nothing else. I can't anymore. I'm just tired of trying to wrap my head around the chaos. There's no answers. We're screwed. Okay.
Okay. So here's what this all means for, and this is going to mean something different for those of you on the call who currently have CoC funding, and versus those of you on the call who are wanting to apply for new funding. So this is going to mean different things to different people. But first we're going to start, what does this mean for renewal grants? So folks on this call, you have an existing CoC funded program. Your current grant agreement ends at some point in 2026. And what does this mean for you? So as I said earlier, as we've talked already, HUD has not yet been instructed to start issuing grant agreements. So while we've talked about that, these are initial administrative steps that they are taking in case they do ultimately lose their case. What it would take for HUD to start issuing grant agreements for your next project term would either be the resolution of this court case, or if Congress, in their discussions on appropriations right now, includes in the next funding bill a requirement that HUD automatically renew existing continuum of care grants. That is, and I will, at the end of this meeting, I'll put some links in the chat where you can find out more information about how to contact your elected officials to encourage this to happen, because Congress can take action as well and require HUD to take some movement. Congress does have that authority. Congress has a lot of things that they are looking at right now, but that is one way that we could get some resolution to this. So, as Jane has alluded to, unfortunately, there's not a lot of good news here for existing projects. Because we don't know a clear timeline of when any resolution to this is going to occur, and some of your agencies have grant agreements that are ending in the next month, 3 months, 6 to 9 months from now, there's going to be a gap between when your current agreements end and when HUD makes any funding announcements. So I have already heard from some of you existing providers in terms of how long if you have additional funding to kind of keep your program going for additional months absent any additional funding. There's a number of agencies that I do still need this information from, so I'm going to be reaching out to you directly. We're also going to start conversations around at what point do we need to stop referrals to your programs? We have already heard from a provider or two about the need to put a pause on referrals to their programs. It may also get to the point in the near future where we may need to start looking at, do we need to start transitioning folks off your programs? So again, be on the lookout for some kind of direct outreach from me to get more information from what this is looking like within your organization. We don't want to make these kind of broad brush assumptions that everyone is going to have to stop operations immediately. There's also some differences between, project-based programs versus scattered site programs. But again, unfortunately, I don't have great information or great news for folks in terms of what your continued funding for your program. Mm-hmm. Okay. Any questions on that impact for our current renewal projects? And I do want to then move to talking about this impact for new project applications. Yes, Kim.
Is it possible for HAND to create talking points about the impact of just the ongoing delay to the Detroit area? I mean, I know the impact to CAS, but I can't quantify the impact to the CoC as a whole, so that those talking points could be used either at the state or federal level.
Yep. Yes.
Awesome.
Yep, we can, and we can provide that. Absolutely. Thanks. Yes, Matt.
Yeah, I just have well, we're about to talk about new applications in this process and being preventative to, I assume, whether it goes one way or another, and how each agency deals with their surplus or commingling of funds to move clients from one program to another is, you know, obviously what they can do, but should is that the point of submitting transitional apps? Because they're not even a full application
Yeah,
compared to a new application.
yeah.
And should we just be submitting full applications right after we submit a transitional app or for a transition grant?
Yeah, so
I'm just
yeah. Let me go through my next few slides because I might answer your question in terms of what does this all mean for new applications and transition applications. It might answer your question or it might just raise different questions. So, uh, okay. All right. So, okay, so what does all of this mean in terms of where we're at with the NOFO and the court cases? What does this mean for new project applications? So the next couple of slides, we're not talking about transition grants. We're talking about new applications where you may be applying for the first time for CoC funding, or maybe you're applying for a new project type or new funding that you don't currently receive. That's what we mean by new, so non-transition. So our local RFP that we released back in November in response to the November NOFO sought applications for transitional housing, street outreach, standalone supportive services only, coordinated entry, and a dedicated HMIS. That was, and in our local RFP, we identified several sources of funding to be able to fund those projects. CoC bonus of about $10 million, DV bonus of about $5 million, and an unknown amount of possible reallocated funding. Reallocated funding is funding that would be taken from an existing project and be used to fund a new project. So we released our local application again in response to that November NOFO, which has now been rescinded. When HUD released that November NOFO, they did, again, that's where we got the information about the amount of CoC bonus and DV bonus funding that was available to us. The December NOFO, which is not currently being enforced, also allowed for those same project types that I just went over and the same bonus funding amounts. Our local new project application did not, if you have looked at it or reviewed it, you'll note that it did not invite applications for new permanent housing, PSH, rapid, or joint component, due to the pending 30% cap on permanent housing programs. So because we have been kind of, with the understanding that we're going to have to make significant cuts to our permanent housing funding, it didn't make sense to entertain new applications for that project type that were just then going to be subject to that funding cap. So our local project applications did not entertain that type of project. So under this reopened 2-year NOFO, CoC bonus and DV bonus are not currently available to us. So those are two pots of money that we do not currently have available to us to even consider funding anything with. The only this is a bit sort of theoretical type of funding that we could submit with new projects to HUD would be reallocated funding. But at this time, there's been no decision made to reallocate any of our existing projects and use that funding to fund new projects. The 2-year NOFO, which again is essentially open right now, and for which applications can be submitted to HUD, new projects, this 2-year NOFO does not allow for new projects that are transitional housing, standalone supportive services only, or street outreach projects. So those new project applications of those project types that we initially, when we released our local application, said, yes, we are receiving these applications because at that time we had a mechanism by which to submit them to HUD, does not currently exist. So the 2-year NOFO does allow for coordinated entry applications and dedicated HMIS, which I can say, hand as the HMIS lead agency is not going to be pursuing new HMIS funding this year. The question about new coordinated entry is still pending because the only way we would be able to fund those projects would be through reallocation, and no decisions have been made in that regard. The 2-year NOFO does allow CoCs to submit new permanent housing projects to HUD. But again, no decisions have been made if this is something that would be pursued, given that up until this point, we have not entertained new permanent housing applications. And now we are under kind of this, pretty aggressive timeline and would have to reallocate something anyway to fund them. So what does this all mean? I know there's a number of you on this call who have, over the past 2 months, been working on a new project application for transitional housing or supportive services only or street outreach or something to that effect. So look, the theme of today is Amanda has no good news. Unfortunately, we do not right now have, as I said, a mechanism or a pathway by which to submit your application to HUD. So we are still asking, though, that you plan on submitting that application by January 16th. And I'll talk in a minute of why we're asking for that. But given where we are right now with the 24-25 NOFO being reopened and the December NOFO being kind of on hold for now, we don't have a pathway to submit to HUD new projects for transitional housing, street outreach, or supportive services only. And we don't have a pathway or a mechanism for that because, number one, we don't have the funding. CoC bonus and DV bonus funding is not currently a pool of money that we have access to fund new projects, nor does this 24-25 NOFO, which has been reopened, allow for new projects that are TH, street outreach, or SSOs. So I guess I'm just going to repeat myself there. But what we are asking, again, is that those applications still be submitted to us by the 16th. And so why? You might be here and you're like, I've worked on this application for the past 2 months. You're now telling me there's no way it could actually be submitted to HUD. Why am I still working on it and submitting it to you? And that is an excellent question. So, because if HUD ultimately wins their court case, which again is still in limbo, if they do win, HUD has said they are going to enforce the December NOFO. And in that December NOFO, those project types, transitional housing, street outreach, et cetera, and the bonus money would then essentially be enacted and be available to us. And excuse me, we do anticipate that, or project, I guess you could say, if HUD does win that case and they do enforce the December NOFO, there will probably be a short turnaround time. HUD has not shown to really acknowledge how much time some of this work takes, and they have issued pretty aggressive timelines. So there's a lot of ifs here. If they win the court case, if the December NOFO is enacted, we anticipate a short turnaround time. And so we are trying to, I guess, hedge our bets as best we can to have something in the wings if we need it to respond to that December NOFO. So that is why we are still asking, if you are working on a new project application, to still submit it by the 16th. And I know that there's some folks who have already submitted new project applications. They got them in last week or earlier this week. So You also may be thinking, well, what happens if I don't submit my new project application by the 16th? Can you still submit it at a later date to be considered for funding under the December, if that December NOFO becomes inactive? The answer for that is we can't guarantee that. Cannot guarantee that if that December NOFO is reopened, that the timeline that HUD may implement at that time would allow us to reopen any type of local competition. Again, it's likely that if HUD does enact the December NOFO, there will be really aggressive timelines that may prevent us from kind of reopening the local process. So again, we cannot guarantee that. And so that's why we're asking to just get it in by the 16th. So another question that we're guessing folks may have is if HUD does not enforce the December NOFO, say they lose the case and they can't enforce their December 2025 NOFO, and so you submit by the 16th, will that project be automatically considered for funding in the 2026 NOFO, which will happen at some point this year? Or can you wait to submit your new project application under a 2026 NOFO again later, which will happen later this year? So at this time, we cannot guarantee that our local project priorities for 2026, meaning kind of what we'll consider for funding under the 2026 NOFO, will be the same as what they have been under the 2025 NOFO. So we just can't give any guarantee in that respect. They may be the same, or they may shift a little bit. Jane.
Okay, you mentioned something, I think, about a early February date.
Yes.
Related to the 24-25 2-year NOFO.
Yep.
Renewals. Can you repeat that? And it sounds like, I mean, that's a date. That's a real thing.
It is. I'm going to get to that in a minute as well, kind of what that means. So can I put a pin in your question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering when the 26 NOFO is going to be released, because that, technically speaking, that should already be in the hopper. Maybe not released yet, but that should already be being cooked up.
Yes, agreed. Yep.
What a mess. Okay.
Yeah, Linda, I see your question. The applications that would have been renewals this year, effective August 1st, considered new project applications. Are you able to come off mute to explain a little bit more of what you mean by that?
Yeah, just like with our currently funded PSH project that we were planning to transition to TSH for the December NOFO. I don't know. I'll pass.
No, I think what you're getting
pass.
at maybe is what does this mean for transition applications? So let's talk about that. So okay, before I get to transition applications, are there any other questions about new project applications, non-transition grants? Yes, Kim.
Just the question I put in the chat, which is just to clarify that the January 16 due date relates only to the December fiscal 25 NOFO and has nothing to do with the fiscal 26 NOFO, if that ever appears on the horizon.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep, you bet. Julia.
Hey, Amanda, I'm curious if we don't have a mechanism to fund those new applications at the moment, and understanding and agreeing that HUD could move at any unpredictable pace. So I do understand that piece. But if we don't have that mechanism in place, were there discussions, and I don't know whether this was hand or the board, I'm not sure where this came from, but were there any discussions around pushing the deadline or just communicating to folks that there's not currently a mechanism, but there may be, and therefore there may be a quick turnaround in requesting these applications again. Basically I'm trying to get at like the potential burden to agencies of doing the application if they are potentially going to like sit in a corner until we get word, and whether there's like, yeah, an in-between option that gave folks a little more time, I guess.
Sure. So that communication is this webinar. That is what this is our communication. The decision was made, and so really made this decision to keep that January 16th deadline, partly because of all of the back and forth and the changes the things that were happening so quickly over the course of December. I know different CoCs have approached this differently in order to have some type of, I don't know if simplicity is the right word, but to have something that we're not changing, like we're keeping this January 16th deadline. And again, and as I mentioned earlier, do acknowledge for those of you who have for the past 2 months been working on your new project application, this is really discouraging news. And I wish I had better news, because the reality is, yes, we want to get your application. You turn your application in on Friday, that nothing may come of it, at least in the immediate sense, because again, right now, we don't have a mechanism to submit it to HUD. A mechanism may open up if HUD ultimately wins this court case. So we are in this really weird limbo area. And I wish we were able to give more clarification.
Can I ask one more thing really quickly?
Yes, I think, yours as a follow-up.
Sorry. Thanks,
Yep.
Amanda. And then this ultimately would go through, these new applications would essentially stay on hold until a mechanism was in place, go through values and funding, and then recommend it up to the board, correct? So there would still have to be, just like logistically speaking,
Right. If a
the avenue for...
If a mechanism does open up, that would make sense. Okay, we're going to start reviewing these applications, evaluating them, making decisions on what to submit. That would follow our typical process. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. All right. I think Umi's hand was next. So Umi.
Thank you much. So I understand, and we are, some of the people on here are in that position of applying as a new grantee for this particular submission. And I had a question directly related about applying. We are looking at the possibility of having a recipient to apply, and that there will be subrecipients, 1 or 2 or 3, some subrecipients that will apply under that. But I'm trying to figure out, how does the recipient get more money than just the 5% admin costs, because they have to split their admin costs with the subrecipients.
Sure.
And so how do they put in there that they want to apply for technical assistance, training and support to the subrecipients as they're processing or getting the compatible what do you call it? Compatible. Yeah, to make sure we have that instead of the HMIS.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Umi, I'm happy to have a separate conversation with you. This sounds really kind of specific to your application.
Okay.
Happy to go ahead and reach out and we can have a separate conversation. I will say broadly, the HUD does require that at least half of the admin funding does be given to your subrecipients. So that is a requirement, but I'm happy to talk in some more detail about some options there for you. So.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, I think Delania Stevens was next.
Yes, Delana. So I'm Delana Stevens with the House of Angels, and we're going to apply for the new project for transitional homes. But I wanted to know, would the people who are renewing their applications, do they get first priority, or will it still, how would that go?
Sure. So for this is going to be more of kind of a complicated answer. So in a typical, let's talk about a typical competition year, of which this is not. What we're talking about right now is not typical. In a typical competition year, when we are able to submit both renewals and new projects, we develop a set of policies called the project ranking priority policies. It's developed through a committee approved by the CoC board that has those very discussions of what is it that we want to prioritize for funding this year. And those priorities may vary from year to year. There is historically a desire to try to keep as much renewal funding as we can, but there are also times where it makes sense to prioritize some new projects. So it kind of varies year by year in terms of what that prioritization looks like. I'm going to also talk in a minute about what prioritization is probably going to look like this year as well.
Okay, one more question.
Sure.
So in this instance, I know that you were saying that y'all won't be funding the new projects and the transitional housing and the DV because I do have domestic violence. So still fill out the application. I'm just trying to get everything, understand what's going on.
Yeah. Yes, and I acknowledge that there's a lot going on. So I will say, when we say, yes, please still submit your new project application by the 16th, it is still your choice if you want to continue to go through the work of completing it and submitting it based on what you have just heard, right? I mean, I can't force you to submit anything. I'm not going to reach through the computer and force you to submit it. So based on the conversation that we've had today, if you choose, you know what, this doesn't make sense for me to do anymore, that's fine. That is your choice. What I would say, if you do feel like maybe you've gotten so far in the application is so well that it's basically done, go ahead and submit it. But again, here's what we've talked about. So in terms of why should you still submit a new project application by the 16th? Number one, if HUD loses and they do enact their December NOFO, that would then create a mechanism for us to submit these new projects to HUD, review them, and decide which ones to submit. And there will probably be a really short turnaround time for those decisions to be made. So if that occurs, we would likely need to just look at the pool of projects, new projects that we have that were submitted by the 16th to make those decisions. Again, if the December NOFO becomes active. Again, the questions are, well, what if I choose not to submit? What if I want to just wait, or maybe even wait until the 2026 competition, which the 2026 NOFO, which will happen later this year? That is also your prerogative if you want to just wait. What I would say is, we have not had conversations yet locally about what kind of funding priorities we may want to have locally in 2026. We are expecting the 2026 NOFO to look very similar to the 2025 NOFO. That's not currently being enforced. But we just haven't had those conversations yet. So again, I cannot guarantee that when we release a local application for new projects for 2026, that it's going to look the same as what it does now in 2025. So that, I guess, is something else for you to consider when thinking through kind of what to do, what may make sense for you to do.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Matt?
Yeah, Amanda, and you may go through this soon, but I guess I just want clarification, because these new projects are subject to if there is reallocation funding available still, correct?
Yes, new projects can be funded with reallocated money. Yes.
Yeah, so if HUD loses, they can be refunded through reallocated funds. And I guess and maybe this is all in the transitional application piece you're going to go about. But would that play into this of who is trying to transition and is available
Sure.
for
Yes.
reallocation?
That's a great
Okay.
segue.
All right, perfect. I'll let you go.
Yes. All right, you set me up, Matt. Let's talk about transition. I am seeing the comments in the chat as well, which I will get to in a minute. So let's talk a bit about what does this mean for transition applications, because I think we're kind of getting to this. Transition applications only applies to current permanent housing projects. So PSH, Rapid, and the joint component projects. Again, we held meetings with all of these providers back in November, late November, early December, when that November NOFO came out, and we saw the 30% cap. And at that time, it was like, we need to get information from our current providers on what may be going on kind of in their thinking in terms of willingness to possibly transition to a non-permanent housing project type. Because we were under the impression at that time, again, that we would need to make really swift and significant decisions on which permanent housing projects to submit to HUD. This was back when the November NOFO was still active, and we were looking at a January deadline to get this information to HUD. So again, that November NOFO has been rescinded. The December NOFO, which does still have the permanent housing cap, is not currently being enforced. But this is where we are. So transition applications are reallocated applications, which are new project applications. So that's kind of where so when you think of transition application, it essentially is a new project application. And again, right now, the only NOFO that is open to receive new project applications is the 2-year NOFO. And the only types of new projects that can be submitted under the 24-25 NOFO are, permanent housing, coordinated entry, and HMIS. So we cannot, so again, this is the same thing that I kind of have said before. We do not have a mechanism to submit to HUD new transitional housing, street outreach, or supportive services applications, and that includes transition applications of those types. So projects that were, say you were a PSH project, and you're like, yeah, I'm interested in transitioning to transitional housing. With this currently reopened NOFO, there's, again, not a pathway, not a mechanism to submit that transition application to HUD. YHDP is a little bit different, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But so those transition applications, again, that you all have been working on, as I talked about just a minute ago, we do not currently have a way to submit them to HUD because they are new projects. And so the types of projects that you are being asked to transition to cannot be applied for under the current reopened 2-year NOFO. However, we are still asking you to submit that transition application to us by January 16th. This has been our communication consistently all along for the past 2 months. Well, I guess 1 month when we moved the deadline back to the 16th. And here's why. I referenced this earlier, but obviously, if the December NOFO becomes inactive, we're going to have to make really quick funding decisions in response to that December NOFO. Even if HUD loses their court case and nothing comes of the December NOFO, we anticipate that the 2026 NOFO, which will probably be released this spring or summer, Jane Scarlett mentioned this earlier, is probably already in HUD's hopper. They're probably just going to take their December NOFO and change the dates and re-release it. So we are really anticipating, it's almost guaranteed. I don't know if that feels like maybe too strong of a word, but highly anticipating that in the 2026 competition, we are going to be limited to only 30% of our funding that we have to submit that with permanent housing. So all of these conversations that we started having in November and December around how, which permanent housing projects do we want to retain as permanent housing? Which ones are going to transition to another project type? Those conversations, if anything, we have just now been given more time to have them and to make those decisions. So in the coming months, those are the kind of conversations that are going to be had with the CoC board, with different committees within our community, so that by the time that 2026 NOFO is released, we will not be caught flat-footed, but we will already have some idea of which existing permanent housing projects will be submitted to HUD with what we anticipate will be that 30% cap. But we need information from you all to guide those decisions. We need the information in that transition application that you have been working on. And I realize that it may, at this point, feel like you're putting more, you're being asked to put more information in that transition application than what is necessary at this time. I think we just felt like, for the ease of simplicity, because these are the forms that we released that we knew people were going to start working on, we didn't change the forms. We didn't go back and change it. Some agencies have already submitted to me their transition applications. Some got them in, before the holidays. So again, to try to eliminate even more kind of confusion or back and forth, we just kind of stayed the course and said, continue to work on these transition applications, which we already did try to make relatively pared down, and get them to us by the 16th. Again, we are going to need information from you, our providers, in terms of what may be feasible for you, what you're thinking might make sense, what you're willing or interested in entertaining in terms of transitioning, because these permanent housing caps are not going away, unfortunately. So just a quick side note, because I referenced this earlier, YHDP is different. There is a mechanism in this reopened NOFO for YHDP projects to switch to another project type, transitional housing or street outreach. There are current conversations being had with our YHDP projects about what may make sense for them to do this year, to do now, or to wait. So if you're on this call and you have YHDP and you're wondering, what about me? It is a little bit different. And I know that you've been in conversations specifically with Meredith about that as well. Okay. Yes, Matt. I was hoping to have answered all your questions with that.
No, I'm really sorry, Amanda. I guess I'm just with these transitional applications we're submitting. I understand if everything goes as it is, we need them for 2026, right? But if HUD, wins their case,
Yeah.
those transitional applications, along with whoever's selected to be part of that 30% cap, will go into that short turnaround time, correct? And are they treated as a new application or in the same pot as the rest of new applications? I guess I just don't understand how they're being treated if HUD wins their case.
Sure. So how would transition applications be treated if HUD wins the case? So I don't know that I'm going to have a full answer for you on that, because I think I heard one of two things. So if part of your question is, let's say HUD wins the case, we have a short turnaround time to submit transition applications plus new project plus some of our renewals, how will transition applications be prioritized locally over other project types?
Yes.
Okay. I don't have an answer for that, because honestly, we've not had that level of conversation because of everything that's been sort of swirling and kind of the stops and starts that we've had. So I don't have an answer for you right now on how they would be prioritized. One thing I will say is, I will just note, because historically we have tried to maintain existing funding to the extent that we can, and because transition grants, while they are new projects, they also do provide continued funding for existing clients. That is a factor that would likely be considered when determining how to prioritize projects. Again, kind of with that mindset of, is there an opportunity here, or is it important to consider maintaining this funding because there are current people that are being served by the funding? So that would likely be in the play. Yeah, as Meredith's point, except for YHG. YHG is different. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that 30%, who's going to be decided to be part of that 30% PH projects that stay would still be part of this if HUD wins.
Yes. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
All right, I'll leave you alone. Thanks.
Oh, you're good. I do want to also, because I think Dawn's question in the chat is maybe similar to this. So Dawn's question about, will the transition application submitted on the 16th be good for the 2026 submission? And I'm going to say likely. I don't want to commit to anything. But what I think are hoping to use is the information that you submit to us on the 16th to help us plan for what is it that we're going to be submitting in the 2026 competition. So I'm hoping that yes, that the answer to your question will be yes, but right now I'm going to say most likely, if that's acceptable. All right, Umi.
Thank you. There were no DV programs that were funded in the 2024-25 submission. That's correct, right?
The 2024 competition.
For
So
the 2 years.
we had renewal domestic violence projects that were funded, but we did not, we submitted one new DV project, but it was not funded. HUD did not, we decided locally to submit it.
Right.
HUD did not select it for funding.
Right, that was my understanding.
Yep.
So my question is, if rather Trump then wins his case, then because there were no DV programs funded before, then we'll be able to see funding hopefully in the December application. If Is that right? If he wins, then he'll change it, and then there's a higher probability that we'll be able to have funding for the next year under the new regulations, under the court decision. But if he loses and you have to fund the 2024, 2025 ones, because there were no DV programs funded during that period of time, we will not have any DV programs funded again for this upcoming year. Is that right?
Not entirely. So so again, right now, we have 3 existing CoC funded DV specific projects. These are projects that are currently in operation, funded to specifically serve people fleeing domestic violence. If HUD loses their case and they are ordered to automatically renew grants, those 3 projects will have their grants renewed for the next grant term. So there will be a continuation of funding for those existing projects. Because they were initially funded a number of years ago. So they've been, kind of in our system receiving funding for several years. If where we're at right now, again, is that we do not have a pool of new project funding to fund new domestic violence projects. That DV bonus funding is not, again, because the 25 NOFO, the December NOFO is on hold, and HUD has reopened the 2-year NOFO. With that happening, that means that we right now do not have existing DV bonus money from which to fund new projects. If HUD wins their case and they reopen or they enforce the December 2025 NOFO, then yes, that DV bonus money would then become available to us for us to review and consider submitting for funding new projects.
Okay, so I'm a little confused. The 3 programs that are currently funded, were they funded under the DV bonus?
Yes.
Or they were funded under the DV bonus? Okay, so I don't know who they are. Could you tell us who the 3 DV programs are that are active?
Sure. So AFG, Alternatives for Girls, has 1 project, and Neighborhood Legal Services has 2 projects. and I will point out, they were funded several years ago. So we're, I think 2022, 2021, 2020, like before any of this debacle started. So they were funded several years ago with domestic violence bonus funding that was available to us in those prior year competitions. And then they are renewed. This is true of really projects. Once you receive funding, you're then able to be renewed kind of year over year.
I see. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. Yes, Delana.
I had another question.
Mhm.
So the ones that was previously funded by us being not small, but I wanted to know, could we partner, like say for instance, somebody was to partner with one of those funded organizations, can we go up under them to participate in the renewal grant? Like,
So if you're interested in, finding an agency to partner with, I'm happy to have that conversation. You can, feel free to reach out to me and we can explore that. Partnering under an existing or a renewal grant is something that you would have to, have a conversation with the agency about, given that, that's a conversation you would need to have with them, but feel free to reach out to me and we can, explore that further.
okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. All right, I want to go through my next few slides. I don't know that I will revisit the chat, see if I got everything. So this gets to Jane's prior question about what needs to be submitted in eSnaps. If you saw the communication from HUD that came out on January 8th, you saw they referenced a February 9th deadline for eSnaps submission. So eSnaps is the online application portal where that is the portal by which project applications are submitted to HUD. So HUD communicated that if there are expiring, renewal projects that are expiring in this calendar year in 2026 that were not renewed in 2024, they have to be submitted in eSnaps. This does not apply to any of our current Detroit projects. All of our renewal projects, you were funded in 2024, even though you do expire in 2026, but this does not apply to any of our existing Detroit CoC projects. Also, what has to be submitted by the 9th is any new projects. Again, we're not anticipating anything that would be submitted because the only source of funding that we would have for new projects is reallocated funding. And as I said, as of right now, there are not any current plans to reallocate any funding. YHDP is different. YHDP, if the YHDP providers do decide to go ahead with a replacement or a reallocation, then they would need to be submitted in eSnaps by the 9th. Also, our CoC planning grant, this is a very specific grant that HAND receives as the CoC lead agency. That also needs to be submitted by the 9th. So the only thing that needs to be submitted in eSnaps by the 9th is CoC planning, which that's on hand to get in. And if the YHDP projects do decide to move forward with a reallocation or replacement, which again, YHDP is different. So for the rest of you, particularly if you have a renewal project, you do not need to submit anything in eSnaps by the 9th. If you are applying for new project funding, at this point, you do not need to plan on submitting anything in eSnaps by the 9th. So if there's any good news I'm giving on this call, that is it. That there's one little step in this process that you don't have to do. So let's just lean into that little, I don't even know if it's a good piece of good news. Okay, this is basically just reiterating the same thing. Your existing project expires this calendar year. If you were renewed last year, which again does apply to our existing projects, you don't need to submit anything in eSnaps. As I have always say, please just make sure that there's more than one person at your agency who has access to eSnaps. That should be kind of a standard protocol anyway, but you don't have to submit anything. Okay, if you were hoping to apply for a new project application or a transition application, do you need to submit anything in eSnaps? No, not at this time. Because again, we do not currently have any bonus money available to fund new projects. And as of right now, there's been no decisions to reallocate any funding to fund new projects. So nothing that needs to be submitted there. And if you are new to this and you're like, what is eSnaps? How do I get access to eSnaps? Please reach out to me. I'm happy to provide you some more guidance on that. Okay, I'm going to talk a bit about project ranking. So I referenced this earlier, where in a typical year, a typical competition year, we submit everything to HUD, all of our renewal projects, all of our new projects, they all go in eSnaps at the same time for HUD to review and fund. And with that submission, we also have to rank our projects in a priority ranking order, essentially saying, you know, list them from number 1 to whatever. And that ranking order reflects our local priorities on what we want funded. The projects that are higher on the list are given a higher priority than the ones lower on the list. So at this time, it is our understanding that we do not have to rank any projects in eSnaps, partly because, as I just referenced earlier, we don't really have to submit anything in eSnaps. Again, the caveat may be for YHDP, but again, it kind of as Meredith put in the chat too, it looks like that might be a moot point as well. So the conversations around, in response to the reopened 2-year NOFO, what is the ranking, the prioritization look like? Again, we've not had those conversations because it looks like we do not need to have those conversations because of the limited things that may need to be submitted. The CoC planning grant, which does have to be submitted, is not ranked. So, okay. I do want to talk a bit about what is in this December NOFO that I keep referencing that is not currently being enforced. But before I do that, I see Dawn's hand. So go ahead, Dawn.
Hey, Amanda, quick, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. I'm not entirely clear why we will not submit renewals into eSnaps on February 9th
Yeah.
per the 2-year NOFO.
Sure. So, because, well, number one, because HUD says we don't have to. That's my initial thing. But my understanding is because HUD, let me back up. For those of us who were, I don't know if back up. The best example I can give is for those of us who were around in 2020 and 2021, so during the pandemic, HUD canceled the 2020 CoC competition because of the pandemic. That's very different. That's not what HUD is doing here. HUD is not canceling any competition, but this is the best example and correlation I can give. When HUD canceled the 2020 competition, they automatically renewed projects for their next funding term. And they were able to, and they issued grant agreements kind of automatically without projects having to submit anything in eSnaps. So HUD has on their end a mechanism to, I mean, they know what they're currently funding. So they have a mechanism to know these are our existing projects that we can issue grant agreements for without the agencies resubmitting in eSnaps. Again, because we did it in 2020, so there is a way technically for it to be done. I mean, to your question of why is HUD doing it like this, I honestly don't know.
Well,
I don't know.
I would be concerned at an agency level, and we'll certainly do our due diligence at the mission, but because the way I'm interpreting it, if we're living with what they're saying in the 2-year 20, is it because the 24 automatically renews for another year? And that's what's open right now?
Yes, essentially.
Okay.
Essentially,
All right. All right.
yeah.
That makes sense. That makes kind of makes sense. Yes. Okay. I see it. All right.
Yeah, and maybe I should have clarified that.
No. There's just could there be more moving parts to this, right?
Right.
And it's all just what if they win or lose? So no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for letting me talk this through.
you bet. And if at any point I understand I get updated information and that I realize that I'm wrong, I will obviously communicate that to you all and we'll take those steps accordingly. Okay. All right, I want to talk just a few minutes about this. I've referenced this earlier, this December 2025 NOFO. So I want to kind of go over real quick what was in this NOFO. Again, this is not currently being enforced. HUD is not able to enforce this NOFO. But as we said before, if they lose their court case, this is what they're going to go with. So here's what's in this NOFO. And this is what we anticipate the 2026 NOFO to look like. So as we're planning now for the 2026 competition, HUD has clearly shown their hand, and this is what we anticipate will be in that NOFO. So what is in there is still the tier 1 funding level being set at 30%. So I don't think we have time today to go into the details of what tier 1 and tier 2 means. What this essentially means, tier 1 funding is essentially the funding that is guaranteed to a CoC, that they know they will receive without having to compete for it. Historically, that level has been 90% of our funding. So the vast majority of our funding we knew we were going to get. The December NOFO sets that tier 1 amount at 30%, and that was true in their November NOFO as well. So a significantly large proportion of our funding would be subject to competition. We may or may not get it. We anticipate what was in the December NOFO and then what we anticipate in the 2026 NOFO is the types of new projects that can be applied for. You can see them on the screen, transitional housing, again, the supportive services only, street outreach, coordinated entry, HMIS, and permanent housing. In the December NOFO, HUD changed some things regarding how permanent housing projects could be funded. The December NOFO still had a 30% cap on the amount of money that could be used to fund permanent housing projects. The change that they made was that 30% cap applied to renewal projects instead of renewal and new projects. In the December NOFO, HUD also provided some very confusing language around how they were going to set aside 30% of their ESG and CoC funding to fund permanent housing projects. That our understanding is that was HUD's attempt to appease the courts at that time to show look, we're cool with permanent housing. So there may be an opportunity in future NOFOs to apply for permanent housing. But again, where that cap is going to come into play, if HUD will revert back and applying that cap to all projects or just renewal projects is a little unknown, but we know there will be a significant cap. In the December NOFO, HUD made some changes that honestly they had to make because they were kind of running a little afoul of fair housing previously. So they made some changes in terms of eligibility for permanent supportive housing. They had pulled back from requiring people that to be served had to be 62 and older, have a physical disability, or developmentally disabled. So they pulled back on that because they were towing the line with what was allowed under fair housing. They also, in the December NOFO, required that for new projects, new rapid rehousing projects, that people had to have a disabling condition to be served, which was a new thing. They added some additional goals and objectives in their December NOFO. The December NOFO goes into a lot more detail on HUD's goals and objectives in terms of what they hope to accomplish with the CoC funding. It is significantly different from what we have seen in NOFOs under prior administrations. It is they talk at length about their philosophical shift in funding. The December NOFO included a 2-track application deadline, the kind of the normal track, which would have been due the end of January, and an extended track for new permanent housing projects, which would have been due in mid-February or late February. Again, so if HUD does enforce the 2025 NOFO, this is the one piece that we anticipate would have to be changed, are these timelines. If something would still need to be submitted, early in the calendar year of 2025, or excuse me, 2026, whatever year we're in. But if they do re-release this December NOFO, this is the content that would be within it. And so this, again, is what we anticipate to be in the typical 2026 NOFO to be released later this year. Okay, so immediate next steps. And I recognize we're getting close on time. So again, this January 16th deadline still stands. So we ask that you do still submit those new project applications, those transition applications by then. And I know that some of you on this call are existing CoC projects and you say, we have no desire to submit a transition grant. That is fine. I've heard that already from some agencies. In that case, you don't have to get anything to me by the 16th. We're already aware of that. Again, for existing renewal projects, we are in this holding pattern, essentially. So this goes back to where there really is no good news here. We are in this holding pattern for any real information on when HUD may issue grant agreements, when you may see, again, your next grant agreement come. And so just, again, be on the lookout for direct communication from me to get more information on what is this looking like for you in your projects. Also knowing if you have multiple projects, things could look differently for different projects that you have. Okay, there's some questions in the chat that I want to turn to. I acknowledge we're at 12. I had scheduled this to go to 12. So if you do need to jump off, obviously you can. We are recording this and it will be posted later. So the first question from Umi, can supportive services only be funded under the DV bonus? So at this time, for what we have released locally, again, our local new project application that is due on the 16th, I believe. No, I think we have in our local RFPs that for DV bonus, the only project type that can be applied for is coordinated entry, which technically is the supportive services, but is very specific to coordinated entry. So you need to read our local RFP and transitional housing for domestic violence. And the comment too about VAWA not requiring service participation, that is true. So that is actually another element that HUD did change in their December NOFO, which I didn't get into, but the November NOFO that was rescinded, HUD did have language in there around all participants have to participate in services. There was a lot of concern about that because of VAWA not requiring services. So that is one thing that that HUD did step back from in the December NOFO. And the way that I read it now is they're essentially saying service participation is required, to the extent that it's allowable. There's some language in there where I think HUD is stepping away from, because they recognize that VAWA DV providers cannot require service participation requirements. And then Ashante's question with regard to new projects, is there a resource we can review that will give us a detailed breakdown of what the funding will or will not cover for the program that you're applying for? So in the I believe in our local application materials, we do provide, and also the budget spreadsheets that are completed, we do provide a link to an information on it's either in the budget spreadsheets or it might be an appendix in the RFP itself, the CoC regulations and what the regulations say the funding can be used for or not used, what it can be used for. If it's not there, it can't be used for that. But if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me and I can provide further guidance. Okay. I think if there's a question that I missed, feel free to come off of mute and ask. I think I got everything. Okay. All right, I realize this is a lot of information. And as I said earlier, I realized that for those of you on this call who have existing funding, existing programming, it's not a lot of really great and encouraging information. And I do apologize for that. I wish I could have given better news. This is where we are at right now. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have questions, need more clarification, even want to dive a little bit deeper into some of the stuff we talked about today. I'm happy to talk more. We will continue to keep you posted and updated as we get more information. But as of right now, this is kind of where things are at. So, all right. Thank you all. I appreciate your time today, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.